Hello! And welcome back! This is part 2 for the Afi Elegance bra transformation. And today we're going to see all the details how to sew this gorgeous cup. If you're new here, behind the camera is Anna, who simply loves sewing exquisite lingerie, and she is finally sharing it with you. Nothing beats the feeling of making and wearing one-of-a-kind underwear. In my previous video, I showed you how to easily change the cup design. Now we're jumping straight into sewing, and the first thing we start with is the bottom cup. We'll be working on the vertical seam. Here we have to match the notch. This fabric was so shiny that my eyes got lost when matching mines. Once I got them to overlap, with the right side of the fabric inside, I started pinning along the edge for the entire seam. Depending on which side you're working on, at the top you will get this little sticking corner. That's totally fine. Let's jump to the sewing machine for the first stitch. My fabric is stretchy, this is why I am using the elastic stitch here. If your fabric does not stretch, use the straight stitch. If you want to line the cup, use the elastic stitch on layers that stretch, to avoid thread snapping. Moving ahead. Next step is to guide the seam allowances towards the center front. And to fix them in the desired position, we're going to top stitch. Again, depending on your fabric, use the appropriate stitch type. Guided by the foot, follow the edge of the seam, and stitch as close as you can. Although my video here runs fast, you take your time. This seam shows on your bra, and that's why it should be as neat as possible. We'd love to have a neat seam on the back of our work as well, wouldn't we? Especially if you're not using any lining. For that, we're going to trim the seam allowances, and only the seam allowances. Again, take your time and be careful. I am speeding up, not to bore you. I have almost done my second cup behind the camera. Let's finish with the bottom side. Chop the little sticking corner to smooth the edge. If you're lining the bottom cup, construct it in exactly the same way as the outer layer. When done, set the bottom cups aside. We will be working on the top section now. Make sure you have the notches marked on both lace pieces. I am going to unfold my lace pieces and place them on the table with the wrong sides up. Here between the pieces will be the bridge. Next, find a nice but narrow elastic. A plain edge elastic is better here, however. We need to stabilize the neckline, because my lace is stretchy, and I need to help the lace enclose the breast tissue. Here we're going to use the zigzag stitch, or the 3-step zigzag. That's because we want to allow the lace to adjust with our body movements. Lower the presser foot, and stitch a bit. Then, with one hand pick the thread ends. With your other hand, guide the elastic to the presser foot. Slightly pulling the threads at the back, help your machine walk the fabric. Let the machine walk past the end of the lace a small portion, but do not cut the threads or the elastic. Bring the second lace piece and arrange it with the right side down. Now apply the elastic on top, and continue stitching. Doing all that because it's faster. If you're lining the upper cup, place the lining on top of the lace, and the elastic on top of both the lace and the lining. When done, trim the elastic, and separate the pieces. Rotate the pieces to their correct position, that is with the elastic and the neckline up. And let me show you a close-up. The stitch spans across the entire width of the elastic. With matching color thread, on the right side, the stitch is almost invisible. Now let's flip the lace with the right side up. These are ready to join the bottom sections. The thing that guides us here is that the notch on the lace matches the seam on the cup. And this notch here, which I forgot to show you at the beginning of the video. Mark yours if you don't have them. They are very important, because these notches show where the lace starts. Curves are difficult to sew, and notches and pins is our tactic to have them perfectly aligned. With the lace edge pinned, I move on to the other end and start adding a couple of pins. Then I am checking if the notch matches the seam. It does, that's why I continue pinning. You'd have to inspect the pieces if yours aren't matching, and rearrange the fabrics. Here's the curve we designed, and this section is a little trouble to sew. That's because these are opposite curves. But don't worry. Use small scissors and trim along the edge a few small cuts. Something like this. Now the curve will spread, and you can easily align the lace and pin on this section too. Transfer pins from the other side to the lace side. We're going to stitch with the lace on top. On this cup, I start sewing the lace where the elastic ends. Depending on your lace, and the fabric stretch type for the bottom cup, choose the appropriate stitch. Don't rush. This is an important seam, and it needs to be as neat as possible. When done, you need to check your work on the back. There should be no fabric puckering. Otherwise, unpick the threads and stitch again. See how the lace ends at the notch? That's what we want. A clean stitch and a neat seam. One more thing I want to include is the note about stretch fabric where the strap joins the cup. We don't want that because we'll lose support. The trick I have been always applying is to pick a thin ribbon that has zero stretch and no mechanical give. The cheap satin ribbon found everywhere is perfect here. We are going to apply it along the seam, overlapping a portion of the lace, and all the way up. Remember, apply the ribbon to overlap the lace. Use the zigzag stitch to catch the entire width of the ribbon. Align the edge of the ribbon to the edge of the cup fabric and stitch confidently. This is a no-show stitch, it doesn't need to be beautiful. And this is how we stabilize the strap section of the cup. No stretching anymore. If your fabric does not stretch, you do not need to apply the ribbon. In this case, the ribbon also helps with the seam allowance and top stitching. We're gonna guide the seam allowance towards the gray fabric. With that in mind, let's jump to the sewing machine and stitch. Do your best here by stitching close to the edge. This seam is the first that the eye catches. Work with both hands and direct the fabric under the presser foot. And look at that! It's gorgeous on the front. We only need to work a bit on the back. Maybe trim the seam allowances and that elastic end. If you're using fabric that frays, it might be better to leave the seam allowances, and only trim the elastic bit. Don't rush like my video. Take your time and check what you trim. And with that, the wrong side of the cup is now gorgeous too. I did all that for my second cup, and I am now ready to construct the bra. But the tutorial stops here. The rest of the steps are fully covered by the instruction booklet. And that pretty bridge is part of the Afi Elegance pattern. Hope you enjoyed my video. Thank you for your support. Have a great time, and all the very best to you.